Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, February 26th, 2021. We're back. We're back live. I know a couple of you were confused, and I still have to figure out whether there's some way of easily interspersing into our rebroadcast shows, our reruns, like intermittent reminders that it is a rerun you're listening to. Because every time it happens, we put up the morning post and we say, okay, well, we won't be live today, but there's nothing in the recording that indicates that, except for the few seconds at the beginning where I tell you what the date is. And if you're listening live and you miss the announcement at the beginning and you don't read the morning post, there's nothing there to tell you. Although sometimes there's tip-offs like, gosh, there's still a year left in Donald Trump's presidency, and we feel terrible about that. And we wouldn't ordinarily feel terrible about that if he were out of office, which he is now, but he isn't then, and now we're playing what we were talking about. You get the idea. But there are lots of people confused and wondering about things. Anyway, I apologize for the absence. It was unavoidable in New Jersey for family business that turned out to be a funeral. So that wasn't very good. It was very difficult. It was my stepmother, actually, passed away, unfortunately, and I wanted to be there to help everybody out, help everybody through it, and it makes it difficult to come back and do another show. But I think we're all finding that it's kind of best in dealing with things if you keep busy and think about other things from time to time, and it helps you get through it. And we'll do that today. We're here on a Friday. We'll take one more shot at a show to wrap up the weekend and take a break for the weekend, and then everything should be at least relatively a little simpler in terms of moving forward. But we're going to have some extra help today. Greg Dworkin, who inexplicably absented himself for 2 days. Of course, we were off the air, and he's always saving up his raft of stories while waiting for his chance to get back on the air, the regularly scheduled Monday, Wednesday, Thursday appearances. But Wednesday and Thursday we missed, and he's bursting, I assume, with lots more stories to share with you. And, hey, that makes for an easy Friday afternoon, even if it is a little bit unusual. I don't know what to tell you in terms of starting today. They're down at CPAC in Orlando. We mentioned earlier in the week that I guess they moved down there. That's the only place that would let so many of them get together. The Washington, D.C. area is still off limits, I think, for such large indoor gatherings. Mask compliance, not terrible at CPAC. I got to tell you, there's more masks than I thought I would see, and I'd say over 50% of the people at least have them on their person, many of them wearing them around their necks and happy to do so. Many still maskless, of course, but lots of people with them on. And I guess what's circulating today is the video of them literally wheeling a golden idol of Donald Trump through the lobby on its way somewhere. Now, it's a weird-looking statue of Trump. He's golden in his... the body is gold, but he's wearing... and it's not a big enough body. It's a rather slim body. But he's wearing, beach sandals and American flag swim trunks, I guess we could call them. They use the sort of archaic term for it. And a jacket and tie otherwise, but the tie is not nearly long. It's not a very good likeness, but it's a big giant golden idol of him, and people taking selfies with it, wheeling down the road and down the lobby, and it's a little weird. So CPAC, I think, lasts considerably longer than most such conventions. I thought that they were underway Monday and Tuesday. Maybe they were, but I guess the big conclusion with all the biggest, most insurrectionist type of speakers coming Friday and into the weekend. And I think Donald Trump actually plans on stopping by and, I don't know, probably speaking for an hour and a half and riling people up. So that's exciting. In Congress today, where they're actually doing things as opposed to making golden idols of themselves and worshiping it, today I believe they'll be working on the House floor to pass the coronavirus relief / everything else rolled up into one reconciliation bill. I don't know if that goes through today. I know at the beginning of the week it sounded like the last vote would happen on Saturday. The big news on that front in the Senate, not unexpected, but not exactly welcome either. Ruling from the current parliamentarian who says that the $15 minimum wage, federal minimum wage provision won't fly under the Byrd rule and reconciliation rules, and no indication so far that the Democrats are interested in pushing back or overruling the parliamentarian, just simply, I guess, having made their case, lamenting that the case came out against them on this one. I didn't see any real indication that the parliamentarian was likely to go a different direction. There were good arguments to be made, but this parliamentarian is traditionalist, I guess you could say, in her approach to things. Very lawyerly, and as we discussed, not likely, therefore, to recognize a more progressive, more holistic economic picture for accepting the budgetary impact of the minimum wage increase. They still use, sort of like I said, a legalistic view of whether or not a provision like federal minimum wage would affect the budget. And it's basically, I guess probably a better way of explaining their view of things is, well, does it require outlays from the federal government in order to make it happen? Or does it bring in direct taxes once it does happen? And, the argument, of course, is if more people are earning more money, they'll be paying more in taxes. You should really consider it as having a budgetary impact, I think, in terms of income. But what they really look for in terms of revenue raising is, well, does it change the rates of revenue? Have we made any statutory changes to how we require people to calculate the taxes that they'll pay and make those remittances? And it really doesn't. That's the way the lawyers in the parliamentarian's office look at these things, and no surprise here. The only surprise was how sure Bernie Sanders was that he could change their minds and get them to believe in it. And I don't know why he told people that he thought he could. He was just being optimistic, I guess. And well, here we are. So, and speaking of here we are, we're now a we because Greg Dworkin is here. That makes two of us. That means it's a we, unless you're French and you're speaking about something completely different. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, excellent. Now I have tea. I'm going to be better.
It's Friday,
It is.
I'm not used to this. It's kind of fun.
Right. Do you usually?
But let's not do it every week.
No. Well, no, we'll try not to do that. We try to maintain schedule here. But I figured it might be the case that you had a bunch of stories, and hey, one, we should get them out there before the weekend, and two, I need this tea, so I thought it would be good if you were here and I could have some.
So you have some. I'll have my coffee.
Excellent.
On the 2 days that we had off for your reasons,
yes.
and my condolences,
thank you.
is the I got a hold of Deborah Tannen's book, the linguist who wrote about cooperative overlapping, and I'm making my way through it, and it's actually really good.
Can I borrow it right now before you're done?
References. It's all talking about jargon, but she makes the point in the beginning. The reason she's doing this is that it's all about communication, and you cannot communicate if you don't understand what it is that you're saying and how you're saying it, which I thought was really interesting. And she leads off by saying this whole thing started, and I think people can relate to this, with a Thanksgiving dinner we had back in the before times when they had Thanksgiving dinners.
People got together and things like this. Okay.
Yeah, people got together, and there were a group of people that got together, and half of the group was from New York and the New York area, including New Jersey, and the other half, and she's a New Yorker herself, and the other half were from California, and one guy was from England.
Okay.
And they had a nice conversation, and they thought they had a really nice dinner, and then afterwards, they were talking about it, and the New Yorkers thought it was great, and the Californians felt like the conversation in the evening had been dominated by the New Yorkers because they couldn't get a word in edgewise.
Yes. Well, it had been. I mean,
and so she was starting to talk about this in terms of a linguistic perspective and a conversational perspective. And she gave some great examples of how this is all relative. That if you, the Californian, can't get a word in edgewise because the New Yorkers talk over each other because the pauses in between statements are much shorter on the East Coast than they are on the West Coast, you should try going to Alaska, where the slow-talking Californians speak way too fast for Alaskan natives who feel like they can't get a word in edgewise because you are talking way too fast. And just, the social norms of what you expect in terms of pauses in between statements is very, very different in Alabama and California, and it turns out in Alaska.
I had no idea about Alaska.
So very interesting stuff.
Yes.
And, of course, the reason I'm reading it is because I talk over David all the time. And she goes on in the book about how you have to explain to people who get very angry with you for, not letting them speak, when, in fact, you're speaking a conversational style that you grew up with that you feel totally comfortable with and didn't even realize that you were being perceived of as being rude. Of course, you weren't being rude. You were being interested.
That is interesting. What did the person from England have to say? Was there a discussion of that? I have some experience with that.
I didn't get that far, although I'm certain that they sounded much more intelligent than the rest of us just because of the accent.
I think that probably happened. My recollection of spending some time there was that they found, speaking to Americans, and maybe not all Americans, maybe West Coast Americans, maybe Alaskans they were talking to. I don't know, but I don't think so. But they were frustrated with American conversationalists because they were too slow and paused so often and took so long to deliver their point. And I wondered whether that was, have you dealt with West Coasters, or was that East Coasters they thought we were too slow? And maybe they're all sort of Hugh Grant, witty banter kind of people, but I don't know. I didn't find that to be... No complaints about it. That's another thing. I mean, they observed that, but they very rarely said it. I don't know. That's interesting too. And what a strange thing. I noticed, by the way, the thread that you showed me originally, where they were discussing this thing and then referring to the book. The original post is gone. Did you happen to notice lately they've?
No, I didn't go back and look at it.
I took a look, and the poor person who pointed this out has been basically badgered into deleting their tweet about it because of the number of people who came in and said, I don't care what kind of stupid excuse this is, it's you people are terribly rude and I can't stand talking to you, and others pushing back on their behalf. But it was really kind of sad to see that happen. But the word is out, and the book is out, and everyone has had their say in that conversation. It just happens that the person who happened to have brought it up isn't, prepared and wearing the correct armor to deal with the sort of pushback, or interested in ignoring it. And many other people will have tougher.
So apparently, a lot of people speak the way they tweet, is what you're saying.
Yeah, right, exactly. And what was interesting was all the people who thought they're angry,
and they interrupt all the time.
But it was the people
this is really rude. But when I tweet that way, it's totally acceptable.
Well, I guess so, yeah. Or they were complaining about all the New Yorkers interrupting and overlapping them, and I guess on Twitter that can't really happen that way. So they used that to bully the poor person who thought that it might sort of be explainable. Off of
hating on New Yorkers is the thing. So if it's an excuse to do so, go for it. That's what happens. Just mention the Yankees. You'll see what I'm talking about.
Yeah. All right. Wow. Well, I just didn't realize how much pushback there was going to be on that. All she was doing was saying,
that's why it's nice to get out of our bubbles. Yeah. Everybody outside of New York hates New York.
Right.
Now, it turns out people inside New York hate New York, but that's besides the point, really. And that's one of the reasons why it's so interesting. It's like people telling me, "Oh, you're a Democrat. You must be apologizing for Andrew Cuomo all the time." What? Andrew Cuomo, the guy we can't stand?
I don't know.
He's going to be governor, and it turns out he still has a lot of strong support throughout the state. That's not an excuse for anything that he does. But let's put this in perspective. We don't like him. We've never liked him. He's still governor, and he's probably going to be governor.
Yep.
So what's your point?
Yeah, well, I guess we can hand you this.
Well,
he
you know,
will
you
be governor and only governor.
Telling bad things about Ted Cruz. What about Andrew Cuomo? Well, what about them? They're different people.
That I don't accept. Right, sure.
That's why the last week's Saturday Night Live thing was so funny. They making fun of both of them. And at one point, the Ted Cruz character says to Andrew Cuomo, "We're both alike, aren't we?" And Andrew Cuomo says, "Do not associate yourself with me anyway whatsoever. I will put you in clown hospital so fast your head will spin, et cetera, et cetera." You know, and that's right. That's absolutely true. So that's the background to all of this. And it's fun talking about this stuff because now that Trump has lost,
yes,
it's not an existential threat to existence every moment of every day. And that's important to keep in perspective as we start to talk about what's happening in the House and Senate, because that's the big news, of course. The COVID relief package is moving along. Manu Raju, as you pointed out in the opening, your cold open, the House could be in for a late night tonight to pass COVID relief. House Rules meets this AM to approve the rule governing floor debate, and that meeting can go on for a long time. Members have been told to prepare for very late night and worst-case scenario passage on Saturday. And I'm happy to tell our listeners that thanks to David, you understand what it means to pass a rule, why House rules have to happen before you even have the debate, what the bird bath means, which means that you get to pull stuff out that the parliamentarian feels isn't germane, as you were talking about in terms of the $15 a minimum wage increase. And my point about everything not being an existential threat now that Trump isn't president, the big picture is this bill will become law in some form, that the House will probably go ahead and pass minimum wage and the Senate will strip it, not only because of the bird bath, but because Manchin and Sinema won't vote for it. Now you could roll in the discussion we had previously in previous shows about, well, what happens if you want to overrule the parliamentarian? You can do that with a majority vote, I think. You'll have to correct me on that in the Senate, but it doesn't matter because you don't have the votes, because Manchin and Sinema wouldn't go along with it. So it's purposeless to try to do that. And people can get agitated about, you have to fight. Democrats never fight. They always lose. You can't get everything you want. And sometimes in order to get a bill this big to pass, you're going to have to give stuff up. You know, what does it mean to give stuff up in a real life situation? Joe Manchin may vote no on near attendance so he can vote yes on Deb Haaland. I mean, these things happen.
Could be.
And so sometimes you just have to accept it.
Well, yes, sometimes it certainly is the case that occasionally, you don't have enough votes from senators who'll say yes, and they simply say, I'm just not going to provide that vote, and I don't really
and if they don't,
have to
there's
give
not
you a
much you
reason.
can do about it. And the whole, again, we've done this over the years so often. You're not going to primary Joe Manchin. There is no West Virginia Democrat that's going to take his place that's going to be more to the left and is going to win. That's not going to happen. And besides, it's not going to happen until he's up next anyway.
Yeah.
So this is the way it is. Suck it up.
I mean, it doesn't help soften the blow any, and there's plenty of pushback in forms of arguments that you would say, well, I don't mean to just say suck it up, when the argument is made, as I'm watching now, as Tom Bonnier, right?
Right. My good friend Tom Bonnier. We talk about this all the time. The fact is, this is something we want. It's something we need. It may not get done in this bill. You have to not just give up, but at the same time, you have to accept reality. And so, things get messy when you're looking at the sausage being made, and nobody's ever going to be happy about it. But the idea that if you don't do this, the entire Democratic program collapses is nuts, because what happens is the big bill passes, and that's really what Americans want right now. It's an incredibly popular bill, with or without the $15 minimum wage.
Yes. And we'll have that fight, and we'll have it several times. And it might not work several times, but we'll have that. We'll call those votes, and we'll see who's for it and who's against it. And as the thing continues to poll with overwhelming popularity, Republicans will look worse and worse. it's hard to accept it when, people argue, well, what if we don't pass it, then that's a key promise. Trump could win the presidency again. He could. I mean,
that's another story, and actually my next story.
Okay.
And that is, of course, the CPAC and the Trump thing. He's not running. But we'll get to that. The thing about the minimum wage, we should have a $15 minimum wage. It'd be much better if we did.
Yes.
There's a difference between I'm giving up, we never fight, and I'm counting the votes and they're not there.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm counting the votes and they're not there. It's not that I want to give up. I think it's important to have the fight to a certain extent. It'll give the press their chance to say Democrats in disarray, except it'll ultimately pass. Nobody will remember any of this after it passes. But you can't do what you'd like when you don't. You have to go with the Senate you have, not the Senate you wish you had, to quote Donald Rumsfeld. And Manchin and Sinema simply aren't going to do this. They're just not.
Yeah. It's bad, but it is.
Well, we elected you to do this. Well, we only have a 50-50 Senate, folks.
Yeah.
You want it done?
Bad.
Elect more.
You know what? Blame Maine. How about that?
Yeah, you could blame Maine. Is it better than if it were 51-49 Republican? You bet. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's going to get done that wouldn't have gotten done otherwise. So again, I just want to put a lot of this in perspective. As open as those wounds are and as raw as they feel, you still have to put the big picture in perspective and lick your wounds and fight another day. Don't give up.
Yes.
But don't expect everything to get done at the same time.
Yeah, you probably shouldn't expect that. Now I think I do blame Maine. Sorry, everybody. But I mean, Georgia got 2 Democratic senators, and you guys didn't get rid of Susan Collins. What's the matter with you?
Speaking of which, somewhere in the pundit roundup early on, I have to go back and see if I could find it. There was a very interesting piece that Alan Abramowitz did about looking at the higher turnout in the last election.
Okay.
And he says right at the very, very end, and I'll give you the tweet. It's a piece from Center for Politics that he occasionally writes for. And he says absentee voting led to higher turnout, but had no effect on the outcome of 2020 presidential election.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So, in other words, if you allow absentee vote, more people vote. That's good.
Yeah.
So we should not outlaw absentee voting.
No,
but the idea that the Republicans have that if you outlaw them, it will help them because absentee voting is why Trump lost is simply not true.
Okay.
But it's a myth that's probably going to be embedded in the body politic. It's like the Ross Perot myth that, Ross Perot cost George H.W. Bush the election. He didn't.
I see. Yes.
With or without him, Clinton wins anyway. But, it's so embedded you can't get rid of the myth. It's a zombie myth that'll never die. And one of the zombie myths that'll never die is that higher turnout favors Democrats, and therefore Republicans will always go for lower turnout. In fact, higher turnout doesn't always favor Democrats. How do we know this? We just had an election with incredibly high turnout, and the House didn't go as positively as we wanted, although we kept the House. The Senate did wonderfully with higher turnout. Sometimes it works for us, sometimes it doesn't. We had incredibly high turnout, and Trump got more votes than anybody in history except for the one guy he was running against.
Yeah.
And that was fine, So the whole voter suppression thing is a desperate attempt by the Republicans, but it's not even logical. Gerrymandering is logical. But vote suppression overall and getting rid of the seniors who vote Republicans just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but they're doing it anyway. So that, leads into what's happening in 2024. Joe Biden is quietly doing his job. We're doing pretty good in terms of COVID numbers, and relief is around the corner. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is 1 dose only and doesn't need to be sub-zero refrigerated, is on the horizon, perhaps as soon as this week. This weekend, it'll get its emergency use authorization. I think the committee advising the CDC is meeting today about it. So Biden's doing the things that need to be done quietly. It turns out the COVID package, as we're talking about, is going to wind up getting done. That, in turn, will not only help Americans, but it may well help the economy. And if the Democrats and Biden are running on a better economy, then the Republicans are going to have a hard time in 2022, even though all the experts are telling us now that the Democrats are guaranteed to lose the House because yada, yada, and it always happens except for when it doesn't. And this happened in the past and stuff like that, as if the pandemic doesn't exist and as if, a recession that winds up being over has no effect on politics. So that's the background behind whether or not Trump runs in 2024. And that's what we'll get to after the break, which is coming up.
It is.
But in the meantime, CPAC is going on. Yeah. And instead of having Romney and Portman and Jeb Bush speak, they have all the nutcases speak, Mo Brooks and those sorts of folks, as well as Trump on Sunday. And that golden calf that they wheeled out of a Trump figure in gold that you were talking about is just, emblematic of exactly what's going on there. They are more and more fringy all the time. And they really, unless they change gears, have no chance of winning in 2024 with Trump in the driver's seat. The thing is, though, that with all of the court cases that are going on, it's incredibly unlikely Trump will run again. He hated actually doing the job. He only liked the trappings.
True. He will want to campaign, and not on anyone else's behalf either.
But, just like last time, he didn't actually expect to win, and he doesn't kind of want to.
I think that's right. We had a lot of discussion over the last couple of days with folks at home. That's the general feeling. He didn't really want to win the first time, so he doesn't have any problem running again in the hopes that it doesn't actually work out this time. We'll see. It's still going to take an awful lot of his energy to do it.
Well, if it helps, everybody still hates Ted Cruz.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I see a lot of people live tweeting from down at CPAC, not C-SPAN, but CPAC. Mike Lee, I guess, giving his usual what gets billed as some sort of constitutional lecture series or lessons, and I don't know whether he's teaching. I don't know what he's teaching people down there, but he's giving them all COVID, or at least sharing it all with them. And I can't believe what's going on down there, but only Florida, I guess, would allow this, and I guess then later their job will be lying about the numbers that they see, or actually maybe all the virus spikes will go back to whatever states they're from, I suppose. Though I assume we'll see a spike in virus cases among the service workers who were serving everybody food at CPAC, and no one will care about them among the CPAC crowd, so we won't see any headlines about it, unfortunately. Okay. Well, still lots of space given over on Twitter today to grousing about the unwillingness of Senate Democrats to overrule the parliamentarian who hasn't ruled against them yet, I guess,
but announced last night that they were going to.
Yes. So, I mean, that's no joke, and you don't really have to wait for the moment to arrive. We know what's going to happen. And I don't know. I feel a little bit bad about that because part of the work we've done here is to inform people. Well, that can happen. It just doesn't very often.
Well, what would the mechanism be if it were to happen?
Well, we've had some discussion about that. And the simplest mechanism, of course, is that the parliamentarian makes this ruling, but the parliamentarian only serves an advisory role and isn't a senator, and can't grab the gavel and sit herself in the chair and say, no, this can't happen, and I have power to make sure that it doesn't. All she can do is say, this is my recommendation, and whisper it in the ear or write it down for the presiding officer who's sitting in the chair and ask them to read it.
And the presiding officer in this particular case would be Kamala Harris?
It could be if they were interested in overruling the parliamentarian. Yes. If not, she'll stay away so that she can't be blamed for it. But anybody
If
who's
not, it's a
serving
done
in the
deal.
chair.
But if they actually wanted to do it, then she'd be sitting in the chair as the 51st vote.
Yes. And
implying that
right.
you have 50, which we don't. But
Which would,
she would be sitting in the chair. She would be the presiding officer to which the question would come. And then what would she do next?
She would say, that's an interesting piece of information you've put on the piece of paper here. But no, it's one of several options. But she could certainly ignore the advice of the parliamentarian and simply rule the thing to be in order under the rules and under the Byrd rule, at which point Republicans, knowing that it ought not to have been so decided, could object to and seek to appeal the ruling of the chair. And at that point, Democrats could then engineer these things and say, well, we'll table the appeal, or they could actually just vote on the appeal. And if they have their majority vote, uphold the ruling of the chair and establish a new precedent for
Is the
interpretation of the Byrd rule.
overruling the chair a 60 vote or a 50 vote?
Yeah, ordinarily a straight up overruling of the chair is just a 50 vote thing, and it is here too. The one twist that the Byrd rule and reconciliation rules add to things is that the usual assumption under the Budget Act when these things happen is that the chair will rule in concert with the parliamentarian, and that therefore overruling a Byrd rule point of order I guess the rules just basically assume that the person in the chair, the presiding officer, will agree with the parliamentarian, and that therefore it will require 60 votes to waive they ordinarily will call for 60 votes to waive the rules to allow an exception in. And I guess the rules were written such that they figured that the parliamentarian's weight would hold here, and that in order to overrule the ruling of the chair, usually backed by the parliamentarian, you would need 60 votes to do it. So, depending on how things are framed, if it's an objection from Republicans and Democrats are insistent on upholding a ruling contrary to the advice of a parliamentarian, it would, or could, certainly require 60 votes to overrule the chair on this. But if the vote is to overrule the parliamentarian alone, and the question is, will the ruling of the chair stand in the place of the known advice of the parliamentarian, that only requires the 50 or a majority. And we would be able to, if all Democrats and independents voting with Democrats voted in favor of this, put 50 votes on the board, and Kamala Harris from the chair could provide the 51st, and therefore a majority, and this new precedent would be established. And it's a simple enough mechanism, but you have to have the agreement of a majority of senators, or a majority including the vice president, and we don't have that at the moment. And as much as we might correctly blame Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema for it, if they're not going to provide that vote under any circumstances, at least on this question, then you're stuck. As good as an idea as it is, and as healthy as it might be for Democrats to view themselves as the aggressors in a war of the rules, the way Republicans did over Merrick Garland and any number of other things,
including the Bush tax cuts, in which case they fired the parliamentarian. I mean, right. I know that they're very aggressive about it. We're not them. See, my question here is, what I'm seeing on Twitter is people are saying this isn't even a question. If Kamala Harris overrules, and then you have to overturn the chair at 60 votes, and so Sinema and Manchin don't get to have a say because they'll never get the 60-vote threshold, and it's not even a 50-50 thing. And I don't know if that's right.
I am not sure either. It's very complicated, and it depends, I believe, on what the I guess it doesn't depend on what the parliamentarian's advice is. It depends what the chair
now you
announces.
want my advice.
Yeah, right. But it depends on what the chair announces. And if it is, the parliamentarian's advice doesn't matter except insofar as the people who are going to argue about overruling the chair have this advice in their pockets. But it's what the chair says that matters, not what the parliamentarian says. So when we talk, this sometimes, I guess, imprecision in language is making it worse. Overruling the parliamentarian isn't a thing that the body of the Senate does. It's the thing that the person in the chair does. And it's not overruling, it's ignoring the parliamentarian.
Right.
But so the person in the chair, depending on how they frame the question, if you wanted to engineer a way through this and had the votes to do it, it would be a presiding officer ruling in a way that was known to be contrary to the advice of the parliamentarian, and appealing that, the ruling of the chair, is a different question than making a point of order against including something that ought to be against the rules ordinarily. And
so,
they require
just as a point of
votes.
information, Ron Klain has already said, by the way, they're not doing that.
Okay. They're not doing it, and it wouldn't have worked because they wouldn't have been able to provide the votes. Only because, look, they took a poll on the question. They did a whip count, and they are too short of getting to the 50 where Kamala Harris would even make a difference. So they tell her, follow your regular schedule. Don't break your schedule. You don't have to show up.
You don't have to be in the chair. It's not like you're going to be needed.
And, they've been pretty clear about what they're going to do, and it might be that it's, I don't know even what, I don't know what Manchin and Sinema say is driving it. That's in part, they're not really on board with the minimum wage thing, but they also have concerns about changing interpretations of the rules and breaking, the norms. To some extent, but there are probably votes on which they would be willing to break those norms, and minimum wage, the truth be told, isn't one of them for these two, and deal with that accordingly.
Sinema has a very, very complicated history in the sense that she's from Arizona, where she was in the minority and has a very firm and strong view about minority rights.
Yeah.
And that's all well and good, but here we are. So she's, she means it when she says she's really trying to work with the other side. And I'm in the majority now. I was in the minority. I know what it's like, and I want to protect that. And that's great. And you do want principled elected officials, even when their principle happens to not go your way. Mm-hmm. The alternative is Matt Gaetz, and we don't want that, or Devin Nunes. But it's difficult. And so, again, the votes aren't there for a variety of reasons. Mm-hmm. And because they're part of the caucus, they have a conference, we have a caucus,
right.
We don't really want to come down on them too hard, and they know that. And that's why when Joe Manchin was leaving last, couple of days ago, was getting in the elevator, one of the reporters was telling us, in the Senate elevator, and Lisa Murkowski snuck in. And as the door was closing, he said to the reporters, "The power center's right here." And then they leave.
Yeah.
And that's right. And so you're going to have Murkowski and you're going to have Collins back Manchin because it's to their interest, Collins and Murkowski, to make that power center what it is.
Yeah. I guess I'll put a cap on it this way. I mean, it still frames up a different fight, but not spending her time tweeting about how Democrats should just do this and overrule the parliamentarian, but should take a different tack to get there, is Elizabeth Warren tweeting instead, Democrats should not be held hostage by Mitch McConnell to help struggling families. It is time to get rid of the filibuster to raise the minimum wage to $15 and pass other bold policies that Americans voted for us to deliver. Now, that's just as, at the moment, tall an order to ask of Manchin and Sinema, but she could be spending her time saying, well, let's just do it right here, right now, by overruling the parliamentarian or, ignoring her advice and then upholding the ruling of the chair that this is allowed, even though the rules might otherwise indicate that it's not. That's not where she's spending her time, and she's talking about instead equally tall order, but we'll have many more opportunities to challenge the reign of the filibuster. This is a one-shot deal, or possibly two, on reconciliation, and this wasn't the place to change the rules.
But you bring up a great point, because this is really setting up the predicate for a filibuster fight later on something that maybe is even more important, like voting rights.
Yes.
Or the John Lewis Act and things like that.
Or at least important. Yeah. It'll be recurring. So
the Democrats want to get this pandemic relief bill through the Senate and to Biden's desk by March 14th, Pi Day.
Oh, yes. I didn't even think of it that way. Right.
When expanded pandemic unemployment benefits begin to expire, according to Bloomberg, and the legislation would extend those through August and bolster state benefits to $400 per week, up from the $300 per week currently. It also provides money for COVID vaccines, testing, and care, along with funds for school, a temporary expansion of the child tax credit, temporary health care premium subsidies, among other items. I mention that because there's more in this bill than just the minimum wage.
Yes, that's true. Lots of good things, and things that they would like to implement without delay, and come back to the things.
And if that's not enough reason to vote for the bill, vote for it because the Republicans don't want it.
Okay, that might be convincing to you too. I don't think there's going to be a lot of defection over the loss of the $15 minimum wage. People will be disappointed by it, but I don't think there'll be a lot of people turning away from the bill among the ranks of the Democrats. So good, shouldn't be. I mean, there might be others who have other objections, but I haven't heard them vocalizing about them yet. I expect near universal cooperation on this one.
Right. And so because I expect this bill to pass, and because I expect it to do good things for the country, that's one of the reasons I'm relatively optimistic about 2022. And when I say relatively optimistic, everybody else says the Democrat House majority is doomed, and I just don't believe that. I think it'll be a tough battle for a number of reasons, including redistricting. But if you do well by doing good, that's a great way to get yourself reelected. And if the opposition has literally nothing, plus their leader winds up getting indicted for crime boss stuff, which is highly likely at the New York State and New York City level. After all, don't forget, Cyrus Vance has Trump's taxes now. Yeah, I think a lot of stuff that people tend to forget about are going to come back in a big way. And just getting out of the pandemic is going to provide such a sense of relief for the country. I think it's going to wind up benefiting Democrats greatly. Meanwhile, the Republicans are still, the poster child there is Marjorie Taylor Greene, up to crazy antics in the House, posting anti-LGBTQ signs in front of her office, directly trying to challenge and intimidate one of the House members, which he's already been, cited for.
Yeah, she's the Rand Paul neighbor of the Congress, except Rand Paul's neighbor did nothing wrong. But she just, if a neighbor says, I support something, well, I don't, and so what? I don't care. You're allowed to put things, outside your own office. You don't have to react to what's next to you. But all right. Inject herself.
So Politico did a story about her, basically she was a loser who was looking for something, and then she found it, and this seems to be the thing that she does best, which is make a lot of noise, all hat, no cattle, but lots of noise, and people in her area voted for her because some people like that. And the Politico story says it has one of my favorite lines in here. In some respects, she's supercharged. Trump, after all, had half a century of built-up fame to propel his improbable run. Greene, on the other hand, armed with anger, opinions, and time, spun her policy light bid out of little more than a deep need to be seen and heard, showing that Trump-style national political figures can be minted with an almost industrial speed. Greene, like Trump, willed herself into the role of a star in 21st century American politics nonstop, social media shared pick a side, ill-tempered spectacle. And here comes my favorite line. Green declined to comment for this article, but Nick Dyer, her communications director, responded in a terse email, "You are a scumbag, Michael," for writing this piece. So that pretty much summarizes, what the 800-word piece was trying to say.
Yeah, pretty much. She's, I think the best model I have for her personally is just she's like the local bully who has just forced her way into prominence by speaking her mind, and she's got some supporters, no doubt, but that anybody who's opposed to her for any reason gets intimidated out of running against her or out of sicking the police on her or anything. She just sort of runs the little local scene based on fear, and the only thing that's left is the angry people who are willing to vote for her. And it works there because it was an extremely red district, and if you get your name on the ballot, if you're the last one standing on the Republican side, you'll win. And they didn't really give much thought, I don't think, in the district to what kind of an idiot she really was. But no normal-ish or even more normal-seeming Republican will stand against her because her supporters will light a cross on their lawn. So, that's scary. We have a real problem here, but we've replaced the racketeer president, mob boss president with the local capo down there in northwest Georgia. And the minute somebody else figures out a way to intimidate her that works, we'll have a Hatfield-McCoy feud down there and people will get shot and then we'll have another idiot instead.
Right. So Dave A. Hopkins, a political scientist, one of my favorites, who blogs at a place he calls Honest Graft.
Oh, yeah.
Which is from a famous, 19th century, early 20th century quote, which escapes me at the moment, but I know it comes from politics.
But it sounds good.
We're doing honest graft here.
Right.
We're not crooks. So he has a piece called, of course, Biden is running for re-election. And it's in the pundit roundup. Let me give it to you.
Okay. I have a pundit roundup.
And he talks about the fact that the Washington Post ran a story about Biden's decision to house his political operation within the Democratic National Committee. To give you an idea, Biden is a traditionalist. Remember, he's a 30-some-odd year member of the Senate. It's one of the reasons why I don't see him trying to overrule the parliamentarian here, or at least push to do it.
Yes, okay.
He's going to house his political operation within the Democratic National Committee instead of creating a parallel organization as Obama had done. Obama never had much affection for the DNC, which was Hillary Clinton Central. But Dave Hopkins writes, but Obama's neglect of the party's institutional strength while president in favor of organizing for America and organizing for action ultimately neither proved major electoral payoffs nor won him appreciation among Democratic politicians and committee members. The party, is part of the party. People have to remember that.
Yes.
A party regular through and through, Biden has decided his interests are best served by remaining integrated with the traditional Democratic organizational apparatus heading into the 22 midterms rather than siphoning staff members and donor money away. Now, the idea the self-declared single-term president has had a romantic appeal to editorial page writers and a few others, but very few others, since well before Biden became the oldest person in history elected to the job. It's disconnected from political reality. Declaring oneself a lame duck from the early days of administration is not an effective strategy for a president to build or maintain influence inside and outside the party, which is why Donald Trump keeps saying he's going to run, by the way. The perception that you might be there a while is a much better way to attract talented subordinates, pursue ambitious goals, pressure members of Congress for support, and the inability to seek re-election is one reason why modern presidents' second term tends to be less focused and less successful than the first. So leading Democrats who have had their president's ear are thus very likely to encourage his intention to seek a second term and be terrified that a premature Biden retirement would only further increase the chances of a Trump comeback in 2024. That ignores the legal issues Trump's going to have and the fact that he doesn't want the job, really. Even if Biden were to have doubts about his ability to serve a full 8 years, a successful re-election and subsequent midterm handoff to Harris, setting her up as incumbent in her own right, would be a much more desirable solution according to prevailing Democratic calculations. And Biden's already shown he's the kind of president who cares a lot about what other people in his party think. Yes, health considerations or other events may alter the plans. It's possible Biden will not be running for a second term, but right now, of course he's running. He's already started. And so, you have to look at
sounds
that.
Right.
The lens by which you focus Biden's actions are based on the fact that you assume he's running in 2024, that he wants to be in good with his own party. He thinks that's important, not just for show, and isn't the kind of it doesn't have the kind of ego that Obama had that said, I can create something parallel that'll be just as good. In fact, the opposite. He wants the party to be behind him, just like he wants Republicans to be behind him, even though he's not going to get that. And he knows that. And the best way to fight it is to have your entire party behind you. And so that's why a lot of the quiet stuff Biden is doing that doesn't get a lot of headlines is going to wind up, I think, paying results. But at the same time, guides a lot of what he's doing and why he's doing it. And it isn't just to have a fight. So that's why, you can't give up. You have to fight. Well, yeah, but you also have to have strategy that is effective. And so it isn't just about tactics. It's about strategy. Yes. And so that's my segment for today.
Okay.
We're getting close to the end of the hour. Don't really have much else. There's a whole lot of stuff in the pundit roundup, demanding Biden, for example, give Will Bunch has this in Philly.com, why Biden needs a primetime Oval Office speech to declare war on voter suppression. If you want to fight on the filibuster, that would be a good fight, not the minimum wage.
Yes, right. Well, and I think that we'll have more chances to do that. And if you do fight over the filibuster,
because the party has an interest in making sure voter suppression doesn't happen. Those are your voters,
right? And that's something that perhaps you might not be able to persuade Manchin and Sinema immediately, but I think you have a better shot at making a case for it there. Although minimum wage, you would think in West Virginia would be a winner too, but
Manchin wants 11. He doesn't want 50.
Right. And I think they tried with him. It doesn't start out at 15. It ramps up. It's not such a big deal. But, look, sometimes people are irrational about it, but they still have the vote. We can't pry it out of their hands, I think. Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
One last item, which is completely different. And I have this in the pundit roundup, I think. One of them is going to run tomorrow, one today. The piece here is from Kaiser Family Foundation. Weekly nursing home resident COVID-19 deaths dropped 66% in the same period that all other non-nursing resident COVID deaths increased by 61%. Why? At the end of December, nursing home residents started to get vaccines.
See? I knew that stuff would work.
So vaccines make a huge difference. There's the story that comes from and the graph. And the other thing that I think is of note is the fact that when you're looking at how you sign up for your vaccine, the national website is called VAMS, Vaccine Administration something or other, MS, something management system, something like that.
VAMS.
A lot of states use it. Connecticut uses it. It's out of the CDC. It's a relatively straightforward site. You put in stuff. You have to have your own personal email, and then you get registered, and then it shows you where you can get your vaccines in your area, and then you make an appointment, and so on and so forth. It's not that hard to use, but it does require you to be able to have a computer.
Yes.
And the downside of that site, as efficient as it might be, is it assumes you speak English.
I do that.
It assumes that you can get on the computer. It assumes you're not blind.
Yes.
People with disability are having a lot of trouble using it. It assumes that you're not homebound because all you have to do is make an appointment within 20 miles of your house. Well, what if you can't get out of the house?
Right. Well, how can you assume that in the middle?
I'm just cataloging some of the problems there with the disabled, with the homebound, with the computer illiterate or computer unobtainable, as it may be. And so it's not going to reach everybody. At the same time, there's data showing that vaccine hesitancy has dropped considerably among people of color, and the most vaccine hesitant people right now happen to be white Republicans.
Yes. Okay. Well.
No Darwin jokes.
Yeah.
This is a problem because everybody needs to be vaccinated to protect everybody else. And part of the reason that people are saying that, even though you get your vaccine and even though it seems to be remarkably effective about keeping you out of the hospital and dying, and by the way, probably helps to slow or stop spread, according to data from Israel. Nonetheless, if white Republicans refuse to get vaccinated, then that means that the viral load in the community is still there. And although it may be a 90 to 95% effective vaccine, that's not 100%. So you still have to take certain precautions, even though you don't have to have them as stringent as you have it right now. And really, people should celebrate how well the vaccine is rolling out and how well the vaccine is working and how it's going to help us to get back to normal life, but not quite as fast as people would like, just like the minimum wage increase won't be as fast as people would like.
That's true, too.
You can't always get what you want.
Well, yeah. We did learn in the very early days of the pandemic and trying to judge how bad it was. You remember when you all did the calculations. A 95% effective vaccine, while there's still a considerable number of people out there carrying and distributing the virus free of charge. 5% of what we've got in America, if you consider that the failure rate, let's say, of the vaccine, still an awful lot of Americans, several million, would still come down with the virus. I remember when we were looking like it was lucky that we were only going to have 1% of the Americans perhaps susceptible to really serious virus. So 5% kind of sucks.
Right. And then last item here, this is what's coming, not what we're fighting over now, which is the COVID package, which I guess its formal title is the American Rescue Plan.
Yes.
But this one is what's coming next, which is the For the People Act. Some lawmakers in Congress, according to Data for Progress, in a poll question, are proposing the For the People Act, a package of reforms that would expand access to voting, limit the influence of money in politics, and require congressional districts to be drawn by nonpartisan commissions so that no one party has an advantage. Would you support or oppose this bill? And the top line is strong support 31, somewhat support 37, somewhat oppose 8, and strongly oppose 8. So it's a popular thing. That's a better one to have a filibuster fight over.
Okay, well, we'll get that chance. So we'll look out for it. Oh, thanks very much, Greg, for coming by today. We'll see you again on Monday. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Now entering our second hour of the Friday show. Didn't have this planned for inclusion, but I guess I'm just going to have to stop in my tracks for this one because this could be the new dumbest thing. All right, well, let's see. First of all, let me open it up here so I can pocket it and save it for later. Brad Heath is the bearer of these. They're not really even. It's not serious enough to rise to the level of bad tidings because it's not going to go anywhere. But well, who knows? You worry about anything that could happen these days. Brad Heath, DC reporter for Reuters on crime and justice, according to his Twitter bio here, and he features this. So now, he says, in the name of preserving our system of government, a lawyer in Texas is asking a court to order the Biden administration to follow all of Trump's policies, and to give Trump the power to weigh in if he thinks they're not doing it, which is a power he has. I mean, he can weigh in, and although he hates weighing in, and he weighs just the same, but he doesn't like weighing in implies that other people will find out how much you're weighing right now, I guess. But he can, in the metaphorical sense, he can weigh in anytime he wants. Just nobody's supposed to care about that. Although he can't weigh in via Twitter, which is hilarious and hampering him tremendously, and that's fine by me. And I'm happy to see it continue to happen that way. But he means, I think, have like a legal role or some sort of legal veto over Biden's policies. It's an interesting concept just in terms of it takes, I'll say this. You're a very imaginative person, whoever it is who put this complaint together. And I guess the idea is, well, if we believe in continuity in government and that you shouldn't swing wildly in terms of policy from one administration to the next. And I know a lot of people have said, for instance, well, if you get rid of the filibuster, for instance, this is actually used as an anti-filibuster reform argument, then you'll swing wildly between policy axes, I guess, when the majority turns over from one party to another. Although that's only if there continues to be this sort of maybe possibly unprecedented polarization as between the parties. It's not always the case that things will swing so wildly. But anyway, the idea is, well, we shouldn't have a system whereby a president of one party or a majority of one party passes unpopular or at least not vastly popular policies, and then in the vagaries of an election, control turns over to the other party, and then they spend all of their time repealing what the previous majority did and replacing it or not replacing it with their own policies or whatever. Just repealing it is just bad enough. I guess taken to its logical extent, if that appeals to you in any sense, that sort of argument, then there are Democrats to whom it does appeal, but I don't think that they're thinking it out to this level. I mean, if it appeals to you that there ought to be this continuity, then yeah, there ought to be possibly some legal role for former presidents to be able to tamp down on the wild swings of policy approaches of new presidents. But that it runs counter to somehow that sort of preservation of the work of previous administrations doesn't, I don't think, appeal to any of the same Democrats who were just previously arguing for exactly that kind of continuity, but through a different mechanism. So, I don't know. I guess that maybe this helps expose the weakness of the pro-filibuster arguments in some way. Or maybe I don't know. I'm sure you could do a better job of it than this. I've never heard of anything quite like this. So here's a screen grab of the person's filing here, which would be a proposed court order, which if their arguments hold sway with the judge, they propose that the judge just sign the draft order that they submit. It doesn't have any legal weight by itself, just to suggest it. But here's how they anticipate a ruling in their favor playing out. After entry of this order, to the extent President Trump believes continued actions taken by the executive branch are contrary to the limits set by this order, he may submit a motion to the court not to exceed 10 pages, and there's no reason in the world, by the way, to limit this sort of thing, but I don't know. Anyway, and may attach exhibits to explain why the action being taken is contrary to this order. Executive branch, this is also horrible doublespeak, difficult to understand. The executive branch shall have an opportunity to submit a response within a time and of a length the court determines to be reasonable under the circumstances. President Trump shall have an opportunity to file a reply to the response within a time and of a length the court determines to be reasonable and under the circumstances. Under no circumstances, a lot of circumstances here, shall the executive branch deploy any nuclear weapon of the United States or undertake any military invasion without the approval of the court. That ain't gonna fly. Executive branch shall establish a secure emergency line to the court for this purpose. Although I will say this, there's been a renewed popularity behind or for the idea that perhaps it shouldn't be the case that the president at any given time should have the unilateral authority to launch or decline to launch nuclear weapons or undertake any military action for that matter. But essentially here, this is just a way to, it's a fantasy under which Trump would be granted some sort of veto over Biden's executive prerogatives. And there's no reason why you would establish such a thing unless following the logic of people who say, well, on the legislative side, in the legislative branch, of government, we ought to erect artificial barriers and artificial mechanisms that make it more difficult to swing between policy poles when the majority changes. When the real problem actually is not so much that the majority changes and that therefore the direction of the country changes, but that the political parties are so polarized that a change in party control of the legislative branch must necessarily mean tremendous swings in policy directions. It just used to be the case that there were moderate Republicans and conservative Democrats, and there was a spectrum, and things wouldn't swing quite so hard. But now they do. And I think probably you would want to look at the root causes of that before you looked at erecting new barriers to realizing the popular will, either legislatively or through executive action. But, okay, it's an interesting fantasy, and I guess deserves some attention. Let's see. Here's the actual motion itself, listed in the court systems here. Courtlistener.com has, I guess, is a privately maintained version of the various that aggregates all of the filings here. Let me see. We'll just go and call it up so we can see what it is and who filed it and what's going on here. It is Jeremy Bravo. That's apparently a person claiming is their real name. Jeremy Bravo, Lindsay Nguyen, 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 the I think one of the more common, is it Vietnamese surnames? And I think I've learned that that's just pronounced almost exactly like Win. So Jeremy Bravo, Lindsay Nguyen, and then two plaintiffs identified only by initials. PP, that could be the person with the videotape from Moscow, and DD. It wasn't one of Trump's pseudonyms under which he allegedly concluded, I think, are we still saying allegedly, under which he concluded through Michael Cohen, the settlement deal with Stormy Daniels. Didn't he have a DD? I don't know. It doesn't mean anything, but just throwing that out there. Anyway, filed in the United States District Court, Western District of Texas, Waco Division. So Jeremy Bravo, Lindsay Nguyen, PP, and DD are taking on who? Nancy Pelosi, Mitch McConnell, Chuck Schumer, Mark Zuckerberg, et al. Defendants. So I would like to see who else gets listed as defendants here. This is pretty amazing. So it's Bravo, Nguyen, PP, and DD, the plaintiffs by and through their attorney, Paul M. Davis, is the lunatic who's put his name to paper for this, to bring this motion for temporary restraining order and in support thereof respectively represent the following to this honorable court. And here's the legal argument. I'll give a little bit of it, just out of curiosity. By operation of the 20th Amendment. Okay. Let's just check in on that, refresh our memories here. 20th Amendment being the one that sets the beginning of the terms of the president and vice president. The beginning of the term of a new Congress is January 3rd. Of course, inauguration being the 20th. Section 3 about presidential succession and the vice president succeeding to the office on the death of the president. Let's see, what else? Section 4, Congress may by law provide for the case of the death of any of the persons from whom the House of Representatives may choose a president whenever the right of choice shall have devolved upon them, in the case of, I guess, an electoral vote tie, right, or no one getting a majority. Let's see. Yeah. All right, well, whatever. They're claiming under the 20th Amendment. Let's see, what else? The Help America Vote Act, HAVA, right? And the 1960 Civil Rights Act, Article 3, Federal Judiciary, now the only branch of the United States government with constitutional authority to act. That's interesting conclusion. So, by operation of the combination of the 20th Amendment, Help America Vote Act, the Civil Rights Act, together now mean that the only people capable of taking this action is the Article 3 federal judiciary. Any more headings of interest? Granting the temporary restraining order is not only required under the law, but merely reflects the attitudes of an increasingly strong majority of Americans. I don't know what the hell that exactly... I mean, I understand the claim that they're making, but like why? I don't know. But immediately my eye goes to this part of the paragraph, which says, maybe I have to read the run-up to it. Granting the temporary restraining order is clearly in the public interest because the court would merely be echoing what a strong majority of Americans already believe to be true. The corrupt two-party system controlled and influenced by defendants does not represent the will of the people. 62% of U.S. adults say the parties do such a poor job representing the American people that a third party is needed, up from 57% in September. Between 53 and 59% of Americans believe the country is headed in the wrong direction. Though the cabal, and it's capitalized here, so I thought like maybe he's speaking about some sort of QAnon level, international cabal running things, but I don't think so. Though the cabal of media entities described in Secret History, what? I mean, is that a reference to anything? Will desperately and predictably, and parenthetically it says, and pathetically, attempt to, quote, spin entry of the TRO as an, quote, unconstitutional power grab by a Trump-appointed federal judge to thwart the will of the people, or similar. The exact opposite is true, because entry of this order is necessary to save the Constitution. Period. That's it. Such rantings, and he's talking about the rantings of members of the press saying, this doesn't make any constitutional sense at all, giving President Trump a veto over Biden? What? Those are the rantings. If you say that doesn't make sense, that's a ranting. Those rantings will merely be the agonal gasps of the dying establishment, recognizing the cold, hard truth. Their reign of terror and corruption scheme on the people of the United States to line their own pockets and secure absolute power without accountability to the people is at an end. So you hear that? All you journalists who've been lining your pockets with all of our firewall money or whatever, your reign of terror and corruption is over. So obviously, a lunatic. What else? Failing to enter the TRO would effectively be this court's declaration that the United States is no different than the third world despotism. A third world despotism. That's what it says. So don't do that, Judge. You'll be in trouble. Plaintiffs will suffer imminent and irreparable... I mean, this isn't even written in English. I'm going to read it to you. This is how it reads. Plaintiffs will suffer imminent and irreparably injury if the court does not enter the TRO. I mean, maybe just a simple typo. Change that last Y to an E and it reads correctly. Plaintiffs will suffer imminent and irreparable injury if the court does not enter the TRO. I mean, and you have to argue that. Even if it's not true, you have to argue that or else you won't get a temporary restraining order. I mean, it's the basis on which a court will act. Well, immediate and irreparable injury needs to be prevented, if I can do it, by issuing something, this temporary restraining order. All right, well, whatever. Any other crazy headings? There's a substantial likelihood that the plaintiffs will prevail on the merits, which is not true, but again, also a necessary argument to make if you are asking for a temporary restraining order. That's just the thing that the courts will say. If you want us to do this, however crazy it may be, if you'll need to show that there's immediate and irreparable harm that would otherwise befall the plaintiffs. 2, that a temporary restraining order can help with that, and also, I guess, or 1A, and then 2, that there's a substantial likelihood that once we actually get a court to sit down and consider this on a non-temporary basis, as an ongoing basis, that your suit makes sense. The underlying suit, not just the motion for a temporary restraining order, which it doesn't. But again, you can't argue, well, it doesn't really make sense, but we do want it. Like that will just result in a no. But there you go. Paul M. Davis with an actual Texas bar number and everything, or at least I like to think it's an actual Texas bar number. I'd rather think it's not. How about that? A Texas bar, shall we check it out? Texas bar number 2407845. 8401. I mean, let's just do this. We'll go over to Google and say, let's Google that. Texas bar number this. 240-78401 and see what happens. Well, it brings us to a story about this, I think. Texas lawyer... how about this? Texas lawyer fired after Capitol riot files ambitious suit. This is a story on Reddit, where I don't usually go. And there he is. I guess he was at the riot and looks like he's wearing a MAGA hat in this picture. Texas lawyer fired after Capitol riot files ambitious suit. Dissolve Congress, comma, don't arrest him. So that's a good suit to file. Don't arrest me. The other people are saying here, look, this guy is now invoking Lord of the Rings in his filings. Not kidding. He's asking for special stewards and invoking Aragorn and Gondor. I wish I could make this up. Edit. See footnote 2 for extra special reading. Is this all? This is all from a month ago. So I guess a different filing that this guy was responsible for. So I guess that really kind of gives you some idea of the flavor of this person here. No indication here anywhere that says that Texas bar number 240-78401 is either invalid or doesn't belong to Paul M. Davis. But that's not, or at least that's not what comes up at the top of a Google suit. It may yet come up elsewhere. It's just that what people are searching for and interested in is his use of that number. But yeah, I guess you would have to check with the Texas bar and ask, is this a person in good standing with you or not? And that would be interesting all by itself as a story. Anyway, he's crazy. So there you go. Let's see. What other fun things are happening here that we ought to catch up on? Talking Points Memo has this fun bit of information from Zoe Richards. I don't know if she's one of the Zoes that just says Zoe or what. Trump is planning a super PAC to fuel what? Retaking the government for Republicans or for Trumpicans or whatever they're going to call themselves now. No, it is for revenge against Republicans, those who have challenged him. So not a let's retake the government thing so much as a let's beat up on people who were not sufficiently didn't pay him sufficient fealty and weren't sufficiently supportive of him, I guess, probably in the impeachment context and anywhere else. So here's the story. Former President Donald Trump told political advisors Thursday that he's tapped former campaign manager Corey Lewandowski to run a future super PAC. One, not the ones he's formed already, but a new one that he'll raise money for later. And I don't know whether he's got the ability to transfer some or all of the $75 million he raised in the name of fighting the runoffs in Georgia or providing for legal counsel in his impeachment or for the cases in which he sought to overturn the election, and then he didn't spend any of that money on it. I don't know if he can transfer that or not. But a new future super PAC that will likely serve as a key fundraising arm in a midterms revenge tour, Politico reported late Thursday. And no, I don't think he plans on transferring any of the money either. This is what he wants Corey Lewandowski to come in and administer this fund that he plans to skim from his supporters going forward. The $75 million he raised is his, and he's going to find ways to convert it to his personal use, probably mostly through hosting events aimed either at furthering this revenge tour or perhaps in favor of, or something that will look like his campaign for 2024 or in support of other Republicans who he does like who are running in 2022. He'll just rent out the ballroom at Mar-a-Lago from himself and use the $75 million to pay the exorbitant rental fees to himself and convert the political money to personal money. But this is something new. He'll skim more money from more people and give some of it to Corey Lewandowski. And then, by the way, of course, skim some more by doing exactly the same thing, renting venues from himself. People familiar with the planning told Politico the decision had been reached during a multi-hour meeting at Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate on Thursday. Many of the former president's top political advisors, including Donald Trump Jr., which I thought he was busy running the family business all these years, but he was becoming a political advisor, had joined Trump for the several hours-long meeting at his Mar-a-Lago estate. Will there be cocaine? I'm there, said somebody. I don't know who. I don't want to cast aspersions. Trump spokesman Jason Miller, disgusting scumbag, LLC, who was present for the meeting for free, said in a statement that the former president would announce more details about his political operation, quote, in the coming weeks. How many weeks do you think? 2? Many of the formal plans for Trump's operation have yet to be finalized, and never will be. And some details remain unclear, like how much money he will steal. According to Politico, other Trump administration alums at the meeting, it should say, but doesn't, included former campaign manager Bill Stapien, who really should have made his escape from this world already, in many senses, former deputy campaign manager Justin Clark, former campaign manager Brad Parscale, wow, serious, and former White House social media director Dan Scavino. What else is he going to do in life? Stapien and Clark are expected to review Trump's potential candidate endorsements following an earlier report that the ex-president would begin meeting with potential challengers to Republicans who have crossed him as soon as March. Trump has endorsed several candidates up for election in 2022, including ex-White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders in the Arkansas gubernatorial race and Kansas Senator Jerry Moran. Trump had already established a leadership PAC called Save America, which was formed after the election and had $31.5 million in the bank at the end of December after blasting potential donors with calls to contribute amid false claims over a stolen election. Super PACs, however, have the freedom to raise and spend with few limitations. According to Politico, Trump has told advisors that he's eager to engage in the 2022 midterm elections, including to exact revenge against the House Republicans who supported his impeachment. He also has an appetite for boosting a challenger to counter Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, who he has criticized for not intervening to help overturn the results of the 2020 election. A super PAC would enable Trump to funnel money into those races and others. So, okay. Not much different from what you might expect, but just wanted to point that out, that to the extent he's going to play in the 2022 elections, it's for revenge against Republicans he doesn't like, as opposed to actually supporting the election of any Republicans. So, okay. Let's see. Moving on. I want to at least just note, I don't need to read the whole piece here, but I'll note for the record, Talking Points memo, among many who picked up on this, Mitch McConnell, brave Mitch McConnell, who made his speech after voting to acquit Donald Trump, gave a speech that was meant, I suppose, to salvage his reputation somehow and say, well, I didn't vote for conviction because I still don't believe in the jurisdiction of the Senate to hear this case, even though the Senate has now voted twice to once to establish and once to uphold the principle, the precedent that the Senate does in fact have jurisdiction to try the impeachments of officials who have since left office. And he's an institutionalist, so he therefore totally believes in whatever, something. Remember the institutionalist argument? Well, he's not one, because he rejects 100-plus-year-old precedent that was just renewed by exactly the same margin 100-plus years later, 140 or so, 145 years later, still says no to this for whatever reason. But by the way, in case you were thinking it was just walking a tightrope, he announces that, hey, if President Trump runs for the 2024 nomination and wins and becomes the Republican nominee, Mitch McConnell, if he's alive and hasn't fallen down on his patio or wherever else and died, or his hands haven't exploded and killed him, will support Donald Trump, because that's what a brave leader he is. Well, that's sort of institutionalist. Look, he's the nominee of the party. At least that's sort of institutionalist. Let's see. Other things worth mentioning here. Well, we're going to have to wait until after the break, I think, to mention them. But lots more here stored away in pocket. Totally different directions to take as we await the outcome of work in Congress, in the House today, towards the passage of the COVID relief package under reconciliation at some point tomorrow, and then handing that over to the Senate. All right, so let's see. What other fun things? Well, nothing we can fit in the break except, I can tease one or two other fun stories, including the one of the ex-girlfriend who, upon being called a moron by her ex-boyfriend, an insurrectionist at the Capitol, has turned over to authorities a trove of his texts, placing him there at the event, and I guess placing him now in legal jeopardy as a result. Sounds dumb. Next. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I promised you something that sounded dumb, and this is it. That's a bad introduction, because I'm about to turn to the Daily Kos diary of Private Jarhead, and it's not the diary that sounds dumb. It's the events being described in it. These are quite competently described events, but incompetent events themselves, you see. All right, so here's the headline. Ex-girlfriend gets called moron, turns over trove of texts from insurrectionist at Capitol. Thanks to Private Jarhead. You're pointing to a couple of other news sources about it, but has done a great job, I think, culling the best quotes from the various articles that he or she found in putting this roundup together. The projection feature comes standard in base model Republican morons, is the first bit here. Illustrated by this pull from the Morning Call. It's the, I don't know where they're actually is. It Allentown Morning Call? But it's a Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania based paper covering, the Lehigh Valley. Do you know where that is? Allentown, Pennsylvania, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, all the way to the border, Easton, Pennsylvania. But what would we say that is? Sort of a northeastern stretch of Pennsylvania. The Morning Call, influential paper in the area, has this piece. Well, let's see. The piece that's pulled from, let me tell you the title of their piece, if I can get that up quickly. Pennsylvania man, that's why they're covering it, not Florida man. Pennsylvania man, get this pop-up out of the way. Pennsylvania man charged in Capitol insurrection after ex-girlfriend turns him in to the FBI. That's turns him in to the FBI, not turns him into the FBI like abracadabra, poof, you're the FBI. That would be a feat, but it would be troublesome because then the FBI would be being charged. Imagine the FBI being charged in the Capitol insurrection. Not impossible under the Trump administration, but not what they're describing here. All right, that's a foolish diversion. Here's the pull from the Morning Call. Richard Michetti of Ridley Park, which I assume is somewhere in the readership area of the Morning Call, I guess, but I'm not positive about that. Ridley Park, charged with knowingly entering a restricted building, violent entry and disorderly conduct on Capitol grounds, and obstruction of Congress. That's a cool charge. Michetti was arraigned Tuesday in U.S. District Court in Philadelphia before Magistrate Judge Henry S. Perkin and released on unsecured bail with electronic monitoring pending an appearance Monday by video in federal court in Washington. All right. Then some of the information here snipped out so that he can jump, or the diarist, he or she, can jump to this next section. According to court documents, Michetti's former romantic partner, it's very nice sounding, went to law enforcement January 7th, it's been a while, the day after the insurrection, and reported that Michetti sent her text messages and 2 videos from the siege. That was dumb. The videos showed Michetti on the Capitol grounds as thousands of protesters broke through police barricades and marched with flags inside the building, court records say. Also smeared feces there, by the way, but left that out for some reason. The security breach forced lawmakers certifying the Electoral College to take refuge in secure areas of the Capitol complex. I mean, they actually diminished the importance or the seriousness of the insurrection, it feels like to me, in describing this. Well, they broke in, they broke through police barricades, and also bashed police over the heads in order to do it, and marched with flags inside the building, and threatened to kill people, and ran around with flex cuffs, and smeared feces on the wall, and ransacked offices, and stole things, and all sorts of stuff. Michetti's text messages described the crowd storming the building and being hit with tear gas and paintballs. It wasn't paintballs, it was pepper spray balls, but whatever. This is according to the court records. Michetti's allegedly said his eyes were burning from the chemicals. Michetti's ex-girlfriend told law enforcement Michetti took a train to Washington the day before the siege because he believed the election was stolen from former President Donald Trump, court records say, and also he hates socialism and public transportation, etc., etc. So was it ironic that he took the train, don't you think? Well, he did it ironically. Let's see. Comment here from Private Jarhead, our diarist. Thanks for the play-by-play, Dip S. Word, you know what that is. All right. Well, anyway, I'll refrain from reading it aloud. Tell us more about the pain. Well, good. Here's one from the Washington Post. Let's see. The piece from the Washington Post is a Capitol rioter texted his ex during the insurrection to call her a moron. That was the reason that he did it. Okay. Feds say she turned him in. Well, I guess he must have been. I'm kind of curious about what his reasoning was now. And I guess it was to say, I told you were stupid and that the people were really on the side of people like me. Look at what's happening here. You're the one who's stupid and misunderstands the forces of history. Of course, by January 7th, it was obvious that he was the moron and she understood the forces of history. But okay. What does the Washington Post add to this? Standing on the Capitol steps on January 6th, Richard Michetti, allegedly took a break from the rioting to argue with his ex-girlfriend over text message, via text message, I would say, after sending photos and videos of the mob and boasting how he had avoided tear gas, but his eyes were burning. Michetti parroted President Donald Trump's false claims of election fraud, which should tell you something about the guilt of Donald Trump. If you can't see the election was stolen, you're a moron, Michetti wrote in a text to the woman, according to court documents. Give him this. He did use the correct form, Y-O-U''RE. However, I would have punctuated this after stolen. If you can't see that the election was stolen, comma, you are a moron. But he neglected to use the comma, and I don't think we can necessarily raise him to moron status based on that. So good job using the contraction. The next day, the woman he had insulted promptly told the FBI that her ex was at the Capitol, handing over to law enforcement the string of texts, photos, and videos he had sent her. I guess he wasn't thinking that through, although I think probably the motivation for some of those people is they believed that they were on the ground at the beginning of a true revolution that would overthrow the government, and that a government friendly to the idea of pardoning them of any crimes or decriminalizing what they did and then therefore, rendering the fact that he had documented his crimes, moot. I imagine he thought he was just never going to be charged with any sort of a crime, so he was fine documenting it. What's his motive for texting her? Private Jarhead asks. Does he think this might change her mind about him? The Philly Inquirer has this part. If you can't see the election was stolen, look at this. In this version, there's a comma. So I don't know whether is there a comma in the court document? Is it just the Washington Post that eliminated the comma? Congratulations on punctuating this so well. If you can't see the election was stolen, comma, you're a moron, he wrote in an exchange quoted in court filings made publicly available Wednesday. Guess we got to look. Adding later, this is tyranny, spelled correctly. They, ellipses, told us, quote, we rigged the election and there's nothing sick. He goes with the colloquial N-U-T-H-I-N, nothing. I assume at this point, I would think it's fair to assume that he can spell nothing correctly if he wants to. So this is tyranny. They told us we rigged the election. There's nothing you can do about it. What do you think should be done? So he's clearly believes he's in the right here, and so he's logically consistent as well as a good grammarian. Photo and video footage. I mean, he's crazy in his conclusions, but whatever. Photo and video footage show a man prosecutors identified as Michetti, dressed in a hoodie, White Sox baseball cap. That's not the smartest thing necessarily, but all right. And surgical mask. Wow, mask. But he's got the mask pulled down in the photos I've seen. Milling about the Capitol rotunda and later checking his phone in a crowd of people that had amassed on the steps outside for the purposes of trying to overthrow the government. All right. Well, that's the conclusion of Private Jarhead's piece, except for the admonition that if you have information about a moron whom you regret dating and who stupidly sent you rude texts from the Capitol insurrection on January 6th, call 1-800-CALL-FBI. Is that a real number? I guess so. Or leave a tip online, and there's a URL for that. Just basically www, in case you're interested, www.fbi.gov, right, /tips. I don't know how often they check that, but whatever. You may also submit relevant photos and videos to the FBI at a similar URL, fbi.gov/US Capitol. And remember, it's CAPITOL. Even Michetti can get that right, so you can too if you've got tips. Very interesting. I'm somewhat curious about reading the longer articles, but I think that's just something I'll entertain myself with over the weekend. In order to give you the opportunity to entertain yourself over the weekend, I want to get to a couple other stories. Let's see. Having said it was entertainment, I got to move to a different one rather than this next one chronologically, because that's a bit of a downer, but we'll see if we can get around to that one. Happened to notice a diary also on Daily Kos by Doctor Who using our old headline there, Today in Congress. So this was yesterday in Congress, of course. Breaking, MTG, and I know we're not supposed to give her the fun, cool, hip initials, but Marjorie Taylor Greene, you got to condense things in a headline, attempts to adjourn the House. Is it a big deal? No. Does it work? No. Doctor Who is upfront and clear about all of those things. But just by way of pointing out what she's up to these days with so much more time on her hand, antics and goofiness and attempting to disrupt things. And it's something that she can do and do repeatedly, so you should be aware of it and ready for it. Breaking, although I didn't really break anything. But at the time it was breaking news. I don't usually post breaking diaries, says Doctor Who, nor are they as short as this one, but I couldn't let this despicable act go unnoticed. So, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, of insurrection fame and QAnon fame and slow motion assassination fame, has just put forth a motion to adjourn on the House floor in an effort to stop work on an LGBTQ rights bill that she contends is reverse discriminatory. They're voting on it right now. I guess that would be the motion to adjourn. You could see it on C-SPAN. So far, 191 Republicans are backing the insurrectionists. Don't worry, it will fail, but it does waste precious House floor time. Just to note, a motion to adjourn is a privileged motion that can be made by any representative at any time and requires a floor vote. Nancy must be fuming. What an and this is interesting. Well, I think we can say this on the air, even under like FCC rules, which we don't actually don't apply to us, but we like to adhere to. What an asshat thing to pull. Although, small typo here, that makes it just that much funnier. Asshat. What an asshat. There's one S missing. Asshat thing to pull. Like, I did this as a hat. That's how dumb I am. I find that funny, and maybe you will too. I hope so, because I'm wasting your time with it. The real question is, and he's absolutely right here, although maybe, I don't know, have I assumed your gender, Doctor Who? I'm reminded the photo accompanying your profile here is of one of the actual actors who played Doctor Who, one of the men who played Doctor Who. Maybe you're not male. I don't know. Sorry. I apologize for that. Not the most important aspect of what is being put here, but it's true. This could happen all the time. The real question is, how many more of these stunts will she pull? And the final vote is 199 yes to adjourn, 219 no, with only 2 Republicans voting no. So 199 Republicans supported Taylor Greene to adjourn the House and go home, not only to avoid taking action on an LGBTQ bill, but also the COVID relief bill that still needs to be worked on today and to tomorrow. Despicable. You're right. Because of the way representatives have to vote during COVID, this stunt took up almost 2 hours of valuable floor time. As a result, Steny Hoyer took to the floor to announce that from now on the Speaker will keep all floor votes to a strict 45-minute limit. No more lollygagging. But there's another interesting aspect to this. Yes, any member can make a motion to adjourn at any time. Now that she's learned this, she'll probably try and do it 100 times. And so will other people, though. They won't want her to have all the spotlight. 199 members voted for it, but they knew it was doomed from the start anyway. It doesn't necessarily mean that they, oppose the bill, but they probably do anyway. But they also know nothing is going to come of it. It's just going to waste floor time. But yeah, now that under COVID restrictions, they're not all supposed to just get onto the floor at the same time and cast their votes. They're supposed to come in controlled groups. But of course, you can vote, through proxy these days. So there's that. But that too requires a little bit of extra floor time because all the members have to line up and say, I'm authorized to cast my colleague so-and-so's vote, and here's how it goes. But also now they have the metal detectors outside the room, and every time members are called to come through those, that causes disruption because you have nutcases like Lauren Boebert trying to evade them. And, votes just take a long time anyway, even without COVID. It's supposed to be a 15-minute time limit for the votes, but people drag themselves in there because they know the chair will wait when they see lots of votes outstanding. They don't just close things and say, yeah, you're going to go down as a no vote on this, and your constituents, if they care about these things, will be mad at you. Get your ass to the floor on time. But now COVID makes it worse, and the metal detector is even worse. So I think they've found something to exploit. This is the sort of thing that will ordinarily infuriate Steny Hoyer, and he'll come down and he's working, I'm sure, to try and find a way to make sure that they can't disrupt the efficient operation of the House to the extent that the normal rules is an efficient operation in the future. He's been clear about that in the past. I recall years ago that he actually proposed removing the motion to recommit, which causes so much trouble in the House, to remove it from the rule books entirely because of the way Republicans were abusing it. But that was too much for the institutionalists in the House, so they just restricted the types of motions to recommit that would be available under the rules. And, it was a small improvement. But, yeah, Steny Hoyer doesn't stand for that kind of stuff very often. I think I wanted to get to something else about Steny Hoyer a couple of days ago that is now probably buried in Pocket, but let me see if I can scroll back down to it and find it again. But I thought it was a great example of this thing that I keep claiming, more or less without proof or links to when and where he did it, like I just did with his my recollection of his story. Here we go. The story in which he sought to eliminate the motion to recommit because of how pissed he was about Republican abuse of it. But I very often say Steny Hoyer, he's more conservative in general than most of the listenership prefers or likes to tolerate, even in Democrats. But I do point out from time to time, he is really, I guess the epitome of the rock-ribbed Democrat in the sense that when the party party discipline requires something, he is there, and he's there strongly, and he makes really very stridently Democratic presentations, and he's a very strong speaker and on the floor, and presents himself well, and it's just he's really a skilled legislator and a staunch defender of party position, Democratic party position. And some people, of course, don't really love that formulation of things either, and they're not particularly happy with the Democratic Party, but I mean it. And he comes across as a much more reliable defender of key positions, even stridently progressive positions, when it's the position of the mass of the Democratic, the critical mass of the Democratic caucus in the House. Very strident defender, even when it's not always in keeping with his own politics. He's an institutionalist in that sense as well. The caucus has come to the conclusion that this is party policy going forward. I don't love it, but I'm a leader of this party, and I'll push for it. And he does it from time to time, and I think people should appreciate that about him when they see examples. And one example, which, I don't think required any stretch of his personal politics, came during the debate over stripping Marjorie Taylor Greene of her committee assignments. Not that he was going to be opposed to that at any point, but people were surprised by the stridency of his floor speech during that debate, which included his appearing on the floor with some visual aids. He had some of his aides blow up a picture of a screen grab of one of Marjorie Taylor Greene's early tweets, I guess, during the campaign, of one of the campaign ads, online ads that she had put together, in which she cast herself as the Squad. You remember the Squad, of course: Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and various other members who have been in and out of the ranks, formally or informally, in those days. But the Squad's worst nightmare, she was calling herself. So next to a composite of scary-looking black and white photos of Omar, Tlaib, and Ocasio-Cortez is her looking what passes for a glamour shot in her mind, colorized, of course, her posing with an AR-15 in hand, saying that she was the Squad's worst nightmare, and blah, blah, blah. And this was essentially implying that I've got an AR-15 and I'll take care of these people. And of course, their worst nightmare would be, for instance, being murdered in an insurrection, probably by someone carrying an AR-15. So, Marjorie Taylor Greene, not entirely wrong in that, but not entirely, not only not entirely in the right, but absolutely in the wrong in threatening it, because she's right that it would be their worst nightmare, but it should be illegal to threaten that nightmare. But apparently it isn't. Anyway, Steny Hoyer, you may recall, had this thing blown up to poster size, but he paused in his speech and actually carried it over to the Republican side of the floor, where Republicans who were giving speeches in defense of Marjorie Taylor Greene were speaking, and stuck it in their face and said, look at this. Look at what she's doing. I'm not kidding about this. Look, you should be ashamed. You should hang your head in shame being confronted with this thing. And it was a very powerful moment, and I just wanted to point out that's the Steny Hoyer I'm thinking of when I say that when push comes to shove, he's a rock-ribbed Democrat and a staunch supporter of party decisions about how they're going to represent themselves on the floor and how they will act as the House majority. He takes his House majority leader position very, very seriously. And, all members of the Democratic Party and Democratic caucus in the House should have felt the same way and likely did. But he doesn't back off of things like this in general, and he doesn't soft pedal it just because he's more conservative. That doesn't mean his kind of conservative doesn't mean he leans anywhere near in the thinking of leaning in the direction that Marjorie Taylor Greene lies in. So I just wanted to kind of point that out and praise him for doing it and say you can look for that from time to time. There are certain issues that I think will jump out at you as requiring that from a House Majority Leader, and he'll do it. So I just wanted you to know that. All right. Well, let's see. A couple other things here that I could bring up. By the way, I guess since I'm on the subject of sort of things that happened on the floor, quick one, I think. I put this aside when it happened, and it was about the same time as that debate and Hoyer's performance in it. In response to, I just happened to see a John Aravosis tweet talking about Rand Paul being a jackass showing up on the Senate floor without a mask. He was reacting to someone else's tweet, which is now missing. But anyway, Rand Paul is a jerk, and I believe he called him a mask hole in that instance. Anyway, what happened was he appeared on the floor and was, debating or just voting or whatever it was. Walked onto the floor while Sherrod Brown was speaking. And I'm sorry that other tweet is now gone because it had the video of Sherrod Brown making this point. And I think it was Sherrod Brown. Now I'm unsure of myself, and I really want to find out who it was, but or find you the video anyway, and I should do that for documentary purposes. But Sherrod Brown, I think it was, speaking about something, or somebody I think had made a unanimous consent request, and it might even have been Rand Paul doing so without a mask. And Brown says, well, in response to the unanimous consent request, says, I reserve the right to object. I don't object at this point. I reserve the right to object, which is something you can do. And it calls a pause in the action a little bit. It's just a parliamentary trick that I wish more people would use. But this is an excellent use of the reservation to right to object. What he says is, I reserve the right to object. I don't object at this point, but I reserve the right to object. Here's what I object to. And proceeds to dress down Rand Paul. And could we just have some application of the rules around here? You're supposed to be wearing a mask. He's endangering people's lives and their health, and he's being a selfish jerk about it, essentially. I wish I had the video for you. And dresses down Rand Paul for being a mask hole, which has nothing to do with the debate ongoing at the moment. He simply, look, there's a unanimous consent request that's been made, and I can blow that up. I threaten to blow that up unless you give me a moment to address something that has nothing to do with anything, or it can have something to do with what's happening on the floor. But if you're looking for an opportunity to yell at Rand Paul for not wearing a mask, there's no opportunity for that during debate. Make it germane ordinarily. But he says, I'm going to use this. I'm going to reserve the right to object, and I'm going to launch into a little tirade here. Excellent use of the reservation of the right to object. Great tool to use in the House and the Senate whenever there's a unanimous consent request pending. If you don't know what's going on procedurally, it's a great way to pause things and say, I'm not going to blow things up, but unless you clear things up for me, I will. And so I just wanted to point that out, that it was well done, and now I have to find the video because the whole thing makes a lot less sense without having the video available to you, but I'll try and dig it up. Time now, though, for us to begin the transition, peaceful transition of power to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. He will cover a large portion, let's say, of the stories that we haven't gotten to today. But one of them that I wanted to mention to you, because we're going to need to read some more about it over the weekend. Maybe it's on his agenda. It feels like the sort of thing that would be. And if it isn't, you can also find it written up over at Daily Coast by Mark Sumner, which tells you that it's an important piece all by itself. The fact that he's picked this up. Long Buried Report is his headline. Long Buried Report shows that Trump knew Saudi Prince bin Salman at MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, murdered journalist Jamal Khashoggi, or at least had him murdered. And I saw over the last couple of days that the fuller part of the story, I guess, is that the Biden administration has their hands on that report and the conclusion of that report, and is planning to make it more widely available. I think everybody knew what the outcome of that was going to be, and that the truth of the matter was that MBS did have Khashoggi killed and engaged in the cover-up of it, but more importantly, that the Trump administration complied in executing that cover-up of that execution. I didn't really mean to go with the word. But yeah, you should take a look at this. Mark Sumner writing it up. Of course, it's reported by all the major papers around the country, and a despicable act, a huge embarrassment for the United States government, and the only way perhaps to redeem ourselves in this is under a new administration to admit that this was the case and the fault of a prior administration and hang the blame on them for it. So something to read up on over the weekend, something I'm sure Justice will be concerned about. But in the meantime, I do have time now. I might as well utilize it and let you know what's happening on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Here's what we got. The D.C. Federal Prosecutor's Office is, quote, reviewing the footage of members of Congress who gave tours of the Capitol ahead of the pro-Trump insurrection on January 6th. I knew there had to be video. I'm glad it's finally resurfaced, and the FBI has got a hold of it. All right, what else? The D.C. Prosecutor's Office rather than the FBI. On the rest of his menu today, in the wake of the Breonna Taylor killing, the Kentucky Senate unanimously passed the bill to restrict no-knock warrants. That is good news. And then more good news after this short announcement. I'll be right back.
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, Republicans also upset that Biden's COVID relief plan would help struggling libraries. That's bad somehow. And Wisconsin hunters killed nearly double the number of wolves that the state allotted. International news, of course, as well. A Belarusian court sentenced an anti-government protester to 10 years in prison. Find out about that next.